All right, folks, so welcome to our first interior operations component that's being delivered in this format, fire control, fire suppression. Um, we've been going through the last number of weeks doing exterior operations components. All of them have some carryover into what we do as interior operations firefighters as well. My plan right now is going to be to record the other ones as well and make those available. So we're going to get right into it. So when we talk about suppressing structure fires, we have to basically it's a strategy it's a strategy and a coordination of resources is required to suppress these structure fires. That strategy and the way that the resources are going to be coordinated is determined by the incident commander. And the incident commander is going to make his determination on how we attack this fire based on three main principles. And those three main principles are life safety, incident stabilization, and property conservation. And it is in that order. So a couple of terms we need to get used to, and these the terminology that's used here, you might hear it used different ways and different, but for the purposes of what we're doing here, I'm going to try and keep this fairly straightforward. And this is the terminology that we in the CSRD are going to use when we discuss fire attacks. So the first concept we're going to talk about is offensive fire suppression. Again, this is an interior operations level course, so there will be aspects of interior operations here as well as exterior. So with offensive fire suppression, usually what we're talking about here is it's entailing deploying resources for an interior tactical operation. That tactical operation is is set to try to accomplish our incident priorities, and the incident priorities set by the incident commander. So factors that are going to help us determine which tactics we're going to use. A couple of things: value. What kind of life and safety hazards are there at the scene? And are there any savable lives and or savable or salvageable property that we are trying to protect here? Another factor is time. How long is it going to take for us to accomplish these tasks? What is the potential for collapse and deterioration of the structural stability? And what are the potential changes that we can expect to see in the behavior of the fire? Another factor to consider is size. When we talk about size, we think about the size of the building that we're going into. Larger buildings, we need a lot more water to be able to suppress that fire. So what are the tactical flow rates we're going to need for this fire? And there are calculations that are available for these to calculate flow rates. What are our available resources? If we have a large building that's on fire, we're going to need more resources. Once we start going interior, we need a lot of resources because we don't just need that interior team. We need people on the backup, the RIT team, ready to go in and save them. We need search teams typically when we're doing these interior attacks. That's not to mention exposure protection, incident commander, pump operators. So our resources really start to go down. And then what are the fire conditions as well? Larger structures have a larger fuel load and can definitely increase the size of the fire that we're dealing with and the intensity of that fire that we're dealing with. And then we have to also figure out what is our objective here. Is our objective to rescue possibly savable lives within the structure, or is it to extinguish the fire, or is it both? And it is very possible and fairly common that these two actions are going to be undertaken simultaneously. So defensive fire suppression, when we talked about, with offensive, we're looking at typically an interior operation. Defensive fire suppression is typically, we're going to decide on this one given a number of factors, right? So first off is, if we're looking at defensive, we're often saying one of these things. There's no threat to the occupant's life. The occupants aren't savable. The property itself isn't salvageable. There's nothing to save here. We don't have sufficient resources for an offensive strategy. Perhaps there's a danger as well of structural collapse, or maybe an offensive strategy would endanger the lives of firefighters because of other hazardous conditions at the scene. So with the defensive strategy, it's intended to isolate or stabilize the incident and keep it from expanding. We're trying to just stop it from getting bigger at that point. Again, with our attacks, we have to be in that mindset of we risk nothing to save nothing. If we don't have a savable life, if we don't have property that's salvageable, and the property, can always be replaced, but we're not going to be risking our lives and our firefighters' lives going into a dangerous situation when there's nothing to save. So generally, our exterior operation is chosen because the interior attack is going to be unsafe. We've determined that, or we don't have enough resources. They're insufficient. And we employ the defensive strategy quite often at our fire scenes, and typically when the following conditions are present, and things like excessive volume of fire. So the amount of the fire that we have there exceeds our ability based on the available resources that we have to extinguish it. So lack of resources could include a lack of personnel, trained personnel, the inability to provide adequate fire flows, so we don't have enough water, lack of appropriate apparatus or equipment to implement our required tactics in the way that we want to operate. Other things are, we have to look at is structural deterioration. The structure has become unsafe for us to enter it on the interior. Another thing to consider is, do the risks outweigh the benefit? Basically, if the amount of risk to the emergency responders is greater than the benefit, we aren't going in. If there's no benefit to be had, why am I going to be putting people's lives in danger by putting them inside of a structure? And then unfavorable wind conditions. Wind conditions can actually have a great a great impact on future behavior of the fire. So situations where wind conditions prohibit our safe entry because of the development of high temperature flow paths within the structure, we may need to reconsider whether we're going to be using an offensive strategy in that point, and we might want to determine a defensive strategy. And so when we're thinking about this, remember, we are paid on call firefighters. I myself am responding from Salmon Arm. Most of you are responding from within your own community. But when we looked at fire behavior and we did that training, you saw how quickly fire develops and how fast the fire will spread and become much larger. And if you consider the amount of time it takes for us to receive first for the caller to call into dispatch to initiate the page, us to arrive at the fire hall, get our truck assignments, get in the truck, and then travel to the scene. Fire has a lot of ability to grow into a size that becomes too much of a risk for us to be putting our firefighters in that kind of danger. So what I have right here, and I want to talk a little bit about situational awareness. And situational awareness is understanding is basically being aware of what our surroundings, what is going on, and really trying to make estimates as to what is going to happen in the future based on what we are seeing, right? Oftentimes we get into this tunnel vision. We have a job to do, we get there, we start doing that job, and fire indicators are happening all around us. What is going to happen in the future? There are indicators happening all the time, and we need to be aware of those. But there are some barriers to our situational awareness. So I just wanted to play this video. It's by a gentleman by the name of Dr. Richard Gassaway. Some of you may have had the opportunity to have seen him. He did a presentation for our fire chiefs a couple of years ago. And there are some questions throughout. And just take a look and see about the situational awareness of the firefighters at this scene.
Companies 18, 23, and 11. Fairfax engine 439, truck 11. Fairfax squad 439, ambulance 13, your second call. Battalion chief 602, response 6, Delta 2203, house fire.
Two-story single-family dwelling. Confirming a working structure fire number 24. Overhead established command. Need to transfer it ASAP.
Okay, Battalion Chief 601, Chief 11, you direct on that.
Excellent, sir.
Now, safety 601, the call metal report is going to be for a working structure fire.
Okay.
Okay, rescue 13, 13, 12.
Chief 11, Calvin, safety report, okay.
Okay, Chief 11, 13, 13.
So now, what was that smoke telling us when we looked at that? And typically I put this out to the group, but I'll answer for us right now. I mean, I'm looking at that smoke. I'm seeing an attic fire, a possible involvement of some of the structural members with the brown smoke that we have there. This is a fire overhead, very dangerous as well, because we're looking at something that is going to get into structural supports for this house. The other thing I saw was a firefighter climbing a ladder without appropriate PPE and going and ventilating a structure without, a coordinated ventilation activity. So a couple of things there, but they may be making their own job a little bit harder as well.
Sean, just a quick point of clarification.
Yeah.
The brown smoke is indicative of the struts in the roof burning, isn't it?
Brown smoke it typically indicates untreated wood, and untreated wood, where you'll find that in homes, is typically in structural supports, whether that's floor joists or roof truss systems. Typically, that's where you're going to find it. So the brown smoke is an indicator to us that that we've transitioned from a room and contents fire into a structure fire.
All right, thanks, Sean.
You're welcome. So now we can see that the fire is now self-venting through the roof area as well.
Okay, medic 131. Okay, Chief 11, I copy that. 1314.
23 to Chief. Give me a hydrant situation. Didn't hear anything about one. We have their own water at the end of the court. I have another hydrant in front of 43242 going just past from the David station.
So now you see the fire is very rapidly growing here. Part of that is because of the air that was introduced by the member that went up the ladder and ventilated using a pipe. And part of it as well, they've got an open door at the front. That open door is another air path. So smoke is increasing. Smoke is, and smoke, as we all know, is fuel. And that fuel is when it comes back over us, has the ability to ignite. So they just showed you there's a radio transmission that said, are we getting any progress from the outside? Because in here, the visibility is 0. So 0 visibility when you're doing an interior attack should certainly be one of those warning signs and get your spider sense tingling a little bit. Maybe these conditions aren't where we should be right now. So it is easy for us to sit back and watch this. Now you see the thick black smoke starting to come, more off-gassing, more incomplete combustion occurring, more fuel being created with that off-gassing from that and the heat smoke gases within the structure. We have visible flames, a lot of visible flames coming from the roof area. We have black smoke mixed with the brown smoke. Should they be inside? I would have to say, based on what we're seeing, no. We can certainly have an estimate based on the way that smoke has changed, the way that the fire behavior has changed at this structure, that it is time to pull those folks out of there. Now we have a mayday call. Zero visibility, and we have a firefighter in trouble inside the structure. So Incident Command has caught on to the clues, has determined that the structure is no longer safe, and has called for the evacuation.
Chief 11, did you copy everything?
From your radio track, name all out. All units operating fire and evacuate structure ASAP. You have a red activation dimension 6 in accountability under dimension 6.
So now they've activated the rapid intervention team.
We got ladder is going to be on side A, David Quadrant. Side A, David Quadrant.
So now we're looking and we can see that the room is flashed on the upper story there. There was no fire coming from there before. Now we have, it looks like we have the room flash over.
All units on the last side, Charlie ASAP. I got a red activation in progress.
So how hard would it be for a rapid intervention team entering in that kind of situation to go and help those firefighters? We have 0 visibility. We have firefighters. They're not entirely sure where they are. and it's continuing to deteriorate as they're inside that building. Now you can see that one room, full involvement in that middle room, second floor. And it's not going to be long for those other rooms to flash over either, based on the amount of smoke that's coming from those windows. So again, when was the first time that they had a chance to see what was happening there? And I'd say first opportunity was when they first got there, was doing a quick size up. I didn't see a lot of size up happening. People were going right for the front doors. They weren't taking in their surroundings and realizing that this isn't the attic space. We're getting that brown smoke. We've definitely got some structural involvement. There may be, there may be more to this, and perhaps starting from the exterior, getting a sense of what's happening might have been a way to start. Once they've entered, there were calls for saying they had zero visibility. At that point in time, incident command should have certainly said, okay, it's time to regroup, let's get out. Smoke conditions and the conditions within are starting to deteriorate. We need to pick up on these clues. And we also need to not be rushing in every, just first thought, we're gonna rush into the building. There is a mentality out there that, we fight fires from the inside. We fight the fire that we're given, and we fight fires with the tactics based on the information that's provided to us. So we have to take that information in. We have a brain. We need to use that brain. We get orders. Yes, we need to act on those orders, but we all have to be able to size up and understand what's going on around there. And our incident commanders are well trained in smoke reading and as well. And we have a lot of resources at these fire calls to help make those kind of determinations. And again, our number one priority is life safety. And ours is part of that life safety. So our safety is a big part of that. In fact, it's our first concern, is firefighter safety. So we talked about offensive, we talked about defensive. Now we'll talk a little bit about strategic transition. So a strategic transition can occur anytime during a fire call. It might be from defensive to offensive, right? You might be the first arriving unit and need to deploy some hose lines, begin with a defensive strategy until we can get additional resources to the scene. Or until we can maybe reduce the fire to extinguishable levels and be able to knock it down enough that we can now do an interior attack to finish the job. Maybe necessary when there's not enough firefighters to meet WorkSafe BC requirements. Perhaps we, again, WorkSafe BC has requirements in terms of when we put people in, how long do we have until we can have a rapid intervention, until we have to have a rapid intervention team set up. We have 10 minutes, basically, after the first team goes in. Or that team must be set up before a second team goes into the building. So again, if we don't have the resources to meet that requirement, and we can't guarantee we're going to have a rapid intervention team set up within 10 minutes, we should not be even considering sending people into a building, because again, our safety first, right? We also might be moving from an offensive to a defensive, which would have been a good idea in the video we just saw, only because they rushed that offensive strategy very quickly. But it's necessary when this situation rapidly changes. So when we do that, it's going to depend on the speed at which that situation is changing. And in that video, the situation changed quite rapidly, and we saw that happening in real time. And those cues have to be picked up on very quickly so that we can make those transitions. The incident commander in this case would communicate the change to any personnel and all units that were operating at the incident. In this case, they asked for them to retreat from the structure. And you're going to order, as an incident commander, they're going to ask for a personal accountability report, a PAR, which is from all personnel. So personal accountability, personnel have to be made of the transition strategy. We are no longer going offensive. We are now in a defensive. The supervisor or company officers always have to know the location of the personnel that are under their command, and they have to conduct these personnel accountability checks when we've withdrawn from a structure. We need to make sure everybody was out and everybody is accounted for, and all that is I am firefighter so and so. I am on attack, and it's usually the team leader. So you'd be going with attack 1. Report. Team leader would then radio back, command, this is attack 1. We are 4 members from name your fire department, and we are on the Alpha Delta corner of the building. Great. I can tick them off on my accountability board. I'll continue that for every team. We're always starting with our personnel accountability boards, personnel accountability reports. We're starting from those in the most danger and the closest to danger, and moving back from there. So the last people I'm going to start thinking about is going to be my safety officer standing beside me and my pump operator. Okay, you guys are fairly well out of the way, but I'm going to start with my attack team, my search team, and then I'll move on to my RIT team, any exposure teams that might be out there as well. So again, we start from closest to danger and move our way out. So As an incident commander, that incident commander needs to do a lot of things at these scenes, and one of the biggest jobs that they're going to have is resource coordination. So the fire attack has to be coordinated with such things like forcible entry, any search and rescue operations that are happening. Ventilation has to be coordinated as well, and then we can't forget the utilities; they have to be controlled also. As the operation progresses, we also have to start coordinating with concepts like loss control, salvage, overhaul. Um, Cause determination is something that incident command will eventually start considering. Okay, we're going to need to do a fire investigation here. There needs to be a thought about preserving some of the evidence so that the investigator can do their job. And then worst case scenarios, there may be situations where it's a victim recovery effort, and that's another operation that needs to be coordinated. So selecting the appropriate hose line is important, and making sure we have what we need and the tools we need to do the job that we're going to be asked for in any type of fire suppression, whether it's offensive or defensive, right? So our hose line selection should be dependent on the fire conditions and other factors that we're actually seeing, right? So what is the fire load, and what is the material that's actually on fire? What is the flow rate we're going to need? So how much water am I going to need, and how is going to determine that. The stream reach that's needed. How far back am I going to be from this fire, and how far will this stream have to reach? How many firefighters do I have to advance hose lines? We're not going to be, if I don't have a lot of personnel, I'm not going to start pulling out the 2.5-inch hose lines that are going to need more personnel to help move around. What are my tactical requirements? What are what's the easiest hose line deployments? Typically, we're looking at pre-connects. What is the potential for fire spread? And that's really important when we look at the at our hose line selection. What is the possibility this fire is going to spread to throughout the structure, perhaps beyond the structure to adjoining structures and other exposures? And what is the risk and what is the possible outcome of that happening? What's the size of the building we're dealing with, the size of the fire area? That all is going to come into play with the flow rate as well. And what is the location of the fire? So how far through the building, if I'm going in, am I going to have to carry this hose? And how fast am I going to need to get there? So our selection of our hose line is very critical for our efficiency and our safety on this fire scene. For interior firefighting, the area involved and the fire load should dictate the size of your hose line. And all that means is how big of an area and how much water are we going to need based on what I'm looking at, and how much is on fire and what specifically is on fire. Backup hose lines need to be placed as well. They must be placed in service at the same time as your primary attack line. We can't just have the one hose line going and think we're okay. We need a backup. Because this backup hose line provides some critical functions, things like it protects the attack hose line team from extreme fire behavior, protects the means of egress from so the way that department can exit that structure for the attack team. It provides additional fire suppression capability in the event that the fire increases in volume and size. We need more water. We need to get more wet stuff on the red stuff. That backup hose line can help with that. So our backup hose line should be at least the same size and provide the same fire flow as the attack hose line. Whatever attack hose line was chosen, the backup hose line should be the same size and have the same rating. And we often use, and when we go in, we're using fog nozzles. And it's an excellent selection because that fog nozzle gives us a lot of options when we're inside of a building and can help in terms of our protection and how we can utilize it. So nozzle selection, I basically already mentioned about the fog nozzle interior, but what we're going to base our nozzle selection on are things like fire conditions. What are we dealing with? What is our available water supply that we have? The number of firefighters that are available to help operate that hose line, and what are the capabilities of the nozzle that's actually being used? For interior fire attack, a fog nozzle can often be one of our most useful. It can also be dangerous if we open up a wide fog pattern. We'll talk about that a little bit later. But fog patterns can be used in limited situations, depending on where you are, to protect firefighters from radiant heat. But when used incorrectly, it can also cause the crashing of a thermal line. A straight stream can also be used. When we use a fog nozzle, we can have a straight stream. We can have a fog pattern, and the straight stream can be used to penetrate hot gas layers. It can be used, shooting into the hot gas layers, cooling it down. It helps cool down the compartment linings, and it can help penetrate in and actually get to the burning fuel. On an exterior attack, again, a straight stream is a great choice. Solid stream is another choice, and solid bore nozzles is certainly an option, right? With a solid stream nozzle, you're looking, it's going to deliver the greatest amount of water over the farthest distance, and it can be directed through very small openings. So once in a while, we may want to consider, when we're doing exterior attacks, looking and seeing, do we have a smooth bore nozzle available for a solid stream? So another thing that's going to impact our water selection or our nozzle selection is the water pressure and the water quantity that we have available to us. Nozzle tip that's too large is going to produce a stream that lacks the necessary pressure to reach the target, so it's just going to go down, right? Nozzle tip that's too small, it's not going to deliver the volume of water we need to extinguish the fire. It's too small, it's constricted, so we need to find the right nozzle for that. Another thing that's going to help us with our nozzle selection is, the nozzle, what's the nozzle reaction going to be? And what kind of personnel do we have? So some nozzles end up having a bigger kickback when we start, and we're going to need more personnel to advance that hose line and operate the nozzle, and that's that's taking up our resources. So the greater the reaction we get from the nozzle, the more firefighters we need to help move that line around. If the number of personnel is limited, it may be necessary to reduce the size of the nozzle or use something like a master stream device, which we'll also talk about later. So like I said, this is an interior operations component. So I'm going to talk a little bit about making entry as well. And making entry is a decision made by the incident commander or the supervisor there. Basically, we're going to have attack lines placed to protect firefighters, the occupants, and property. The factors we're going to use to place attack lines are: what is the wind direction? What are the building conditions? What is the initial fire location, the location of occupants, and what are our exposures and how close are they, and what is the risk of them catching as well? Before we enter a building, every member, and this isn't just the incident commander, but every single member that's going to be going into that building should conduct a quick size up. Again, this is part of that situational awareness. We need to be aware of the conditions we're entering and what we're going to be facing and see if this is the right call. And if you start seeing things that maybe concern you, this is a good time to bring that up to the team leader before you start making entry. We need to maintain that high level of situational awareness because, as we saw in the video, things can change very quickly. So other pre-entry considerations that are vital, we need to read fire behavior conditions, right? So what is happening there right now, right? Also, what is potentially going to happen in the future based on what we're seeing. So before I enter, I also want to know, what was my tactical assignment? Am I an attack team? Am I a search team? Am I attack 1, attack 2? And what was my job going to the second floor? Was it going to the first floor? Do I know exactly what I need to be doing? We need to identify potential emergency escape routes. So how am I going to get out of this building if I need to get out of there fast? So making note of windows, of doors, of different ways in and out. We're going to be going to buildings we haven't been in before. So you're not going to have knowledge necessarily of the floor plan. And so identify those before you need them. We want to take a look and evaluate what we need for forcible entry. How are we actually going to get in here? If the door is already open, not too much of a concern. If the door is locked and we're dealing with that, we need to start making some decisions as to what we're going to need to get through that lock. And so identifying hazards, right? Any other hazards that we may be aware of that may be happening. Okay, I start seeing, oh, just inside the door, there's a propane tank there or something. All of these come into play. We want to verify that our radios are receiving and transmitting correctly as well. So a quick radio check, very important. If we lose communications inside of a structure, it can be catastrophic. And the second you start losing communications, that's the time you start backing out. We want to make sure our SCBAs and our SCBA is on, our cylinder is full, and is operating properly before we start making entry. We're not waiting to take that first step through the threshold before we're on air. We're going to be on air, making sure it's working, then we're going to go in, right? We're also going to make sure that our PAS device, our personal alert safety system device, is activated and operating properly. We're going to make sure and we're also going to make sure that the other team members are prepared to enter the structure, and we do that by doing buddy check, right? And these buddy checks are vitally important. Things get missed. I've seen people walk in without their helmets on because they didn't do a quick buddy check and things like that. Making sure that your collar is done up, making sure that your hood is covering every exposed area. Because the time to find out is not when you're doing an interior attack. When you're making entry, you also need to carry the tools and equipment that you're going to need for the job you've been asked to do. That job could include things like, opening interior doors, closing them. It could be checking concealed spaces for fire extension, which would require you to have something to get into those concealed spaces, whether it's an axe or some other cutting device. And we also want to know that we have, that if we need anything for making emergency exits. And in this case, we have our drag rescue devices on our personal gear. We often carry webbing. I would suggest that that we don't put ourselves into situations where there may be a requirement for a window bail. So now it's come time, right, we're getting ready, we're about to make entry. So first thing, let's look at the firefighter who's assigned to the nozzle. They need to open the nozzle fully to ensure that we have an adequate flow of water. They need to check the pattern setting. What am I on a fog stream? Am I on a straight stream? And make sure that they have the pattern that they wanted. And whether it's a narrow fog, a straight stream, typically that's what we're starting off with when we're going inside. And we want to bleed the air from the hose line because we don't want to be sitting inside blowing air at the fire and thinking we have water coming down the line, right? So then we start making entry. We're going to wait in a safe area near the building before we make that entry, right? We're going to extinguish any visible fires that we can see in the fascia, the soffits, any cornices, any exterior overhangs, open windows, doors. We're going to extinguish that before we go, right? We're going to stay low. We're going to stay out of the doorway while the door is open. And before we do that, and before we walk through that door, we're always checking that door for heat, right? We need to know a couple of things from that. We know that's going to give us an indication of where the thermal line is. And if that thermal line is way too far down, that might not be a structure we're going to be going into. If that thermal line is a little bit higher and we can get in there either standing up or in a little bit of a crouch, that may be a situation we could consider, right? So ways we can do that: back of the hand, we pull back the glove, we feel with the back of the hand on the door. Steel doors, metal doors of any kind, often we can just do a quick fog pattern on the door, and that's a great determination of where that thermal line is, where the water starts evaporating from. There's my thermal line. Perfect. Thermal imaging camera is also is something else we can use. We point it at the door. We see where the heat starts, on that door. So we're going to keep the door closed as well until the hose line is charged. We're completely ready, and the crew is assembled and ready to make entrance. If the fire is a ventilation controlled fire and the door is opened, so ventilation control, let's just recap a little bit. Ventilation control means that fire has all the fuel it needs, but it's starved of oxygen, so it's actually starting to die down. So this fire is now ventilation controlled. It has lots of fuel, it just doesn't have air, it doesn't have oxygen. So if this fire is vent limited and we open the door, a couple of things we can expect to happen. A significant increase in the heat release rate can happen very quickly. Fire behavior is going to intensify. We are giving it the air it needed, and that fire is going to shoot right back up. The unburned fuel in the form of smoke is going to escape out of the top of the doorway, while fresh air starts getting sucked in at the bottom, providing oxygen for that fire. So the smoky air is starting to go out the top, and that fire is sucking all of this fresh air in from underneath. It's a bilateral flow happening. The cooling of the overhead hot gases can help reduce the risk of ignition overhead directly at the door. However, this increase in oxygen often cancels that out. So when we open the door, we want to take a look at that smoke movement and the airflow. We want to open it just a little bit and apply some water to that hot gas layer before we make full entry. We're going to cool that a little bit, and we're going to cool that down. As we learned in fire behavior, fires are very hot now. They're hotter than they've ever been, and that has a lot to do with the petrochemicals that are used in our furnishings. That has a lot to do with the building materials that we use in construction. So let's cool that space a little bit and make it a little bit safer for us before we enter. We're also going to wait 5-10 seconds after doing that to observe any reactions from what we've done before we enter the structure. And we want to make sure we're maintaining door control, right? Ways we can do that is we can have a rope or webbing can be used to hold the door in place, or utility strap, anything like that. If you can tie it off somewhere so that the door remains open, that's the best situation. Might require a firefighter there making sure that door remains open. So, and another way to do it is to chalk the door open and keep it open that way. So traditionally, the guideline has always been we want to attack the fire from the unburned side. And there's been some recent developments from the National Institute of Science and Technology, NIST, as some of you may have heard of, that have kind of cast some doubt on that whole theory of attacking from the unburned side. The greater heat is, so some of those factors that are changing the fire service's understanding of fire behavior and structure fire is that the greater heat release rates of modern building construction materials and modern furnishings has changed some of our understanding of fire, and the increased effect of wind on fire expansion and fire development. We're finding now that wind has a bigger impact on fire spread and development than we first thought. So wind creates airflow patterns within a structure, directly increases fire expansion, and has resulted in firefighter casualties a significant number of times. We want to attack with the wind to our back. The PPV fan, the positive pressure ventilation fan, will help to overcome the natural wind currents, and in some cases can make it so that we are attacking with the wind at our back. In most cases, should be able to overcome some minor wind situations. But in some cases, if the wind is too strong, the PPV fan cannot counter that. So to determine the best entry point, we want to look at our wind direction and really take that into account. So it's no longer just attack from the unburned side to the burnt side. Now we need to be starting to think about as well the weather conditions and the wind. So now I'm going to go through a couple of different terminologies with how we attack our fires. So first concept we're going to talk about here is a direct attack, right? So a direct attack uses water most efficiently on free burning fires because the water is applied directly onto the burning fuel until that fire is extinguished. Okay, you direct the stream. You direct the stream onto ceiling and wall to stop or slow pyrolysis on a hot surface, so stop the burning process as well. But we don't want to apply the water long enough that it's going to start to upset the thermal layering in the compartment. If the hot smoking gases that are occurring at the ceiling level are best left at that ceiling level. We want to cool them down, yes, but what we don't want to do is apply water in such a way that we actually mix that hot smoking gases with the somewhat survivable air that we are working, an environment that we're working in below. And it also comes into loss control. So we want to be careful because by adding more water, we are causing more damage as well. We don't want to cause more damage than the fire was going to cause in the first place. So we talked about a direct attack. Now we'll talk about an indirect attack. So indirect attack, this is used when firefighters are unable to enter the building or the compartment because of the intense heat that's inside, right? We can make an indirect attack from the outside of the structure. And typically it's made through a window or some other opening. And with an indirect attack, what we're doing is we're directing the stream towards the ceiling to cool the room, okay? So again, that thermal layer is that hot smoking gases is gonna keep that fire going. Part of the fire triangle is the heat. If we have sufficient heat and the fuel and the oxygen, we are gonna get that sustained chemical reaction that is fire. So with an indirect attack, what we're trying to do here is produce large quantities of steam. So when we're creating these large quantities of steam, we need to also coordinate this with ventilation. If we make sure we have ventilation in place, especially if there's a situation where we think there might be a survivable life within the structure. So I'm going to go through the steps now of how to do an indirect attack. And typically what we're looking at with an indirect attack is we want to have what's called a narrow fog stream. So about a 30-degree angle, 30 degrees on that fog stream. And that's introduced through an opening and directed at the ceiling to where the temperature is the highest. The heat in that thermal layer is going to convert that water spray into steam, and that fills the compartment and absorbs the majority of heat. If we remember, steam expands to 1,700 times the size of that water droplet. So we're actually displacing oxygen and the water is creating a cooling effect as well. So once the majority of the fire has been reduced and the space has been ventilated, hose lines can then be brought in inside, and firefighters can make a direct attack on the body of the fire. At some point in time, we're going to need to make a direct attack. We need to put the water directly on the burning fuels. But these indirect attacks can help us to gain control over a situation while maybe we can't do that direct attack. So with direct and indirect also comes what's called a combination attack. So what a combination attack does is it combines the cooling of the hot gas layers at the ceiling level that we use in an indirect attack with the direct attack on fuels burning near the floor level. So again, we're doing both. We're cooling the area and cooling the hot smoking gases, and we're directly attacking the fire. So there's a couple of different ways we do that. And typically it's going to be, this is an interior move because we're inside if we're, in this case where we're making a direct attack. And the way we do that is we're looking at moving the nozzle from an area overhead back to the floor, either in a Z, an inverted T, so upside down T like this, or in some kind of rotational manner like they have on the slide here. So what that's going to do, again, we're cooling the hot smoking gases and we're applying water directly to the burning fuels. Keep in mind, however, that an excessive application of water to smoke isn't going to extinguish the fire and may end up causing unnecessary water damage, as we talked about in the previous slide. Applying water to smoke that's not heated may disrupt the thermal layering and decrease visibility. All right, so gas cooling. We talked a little bit about that when we were talking about direct attacks, indirect attacks. Gas cooling is a way of reducing the heat release from the hot gas layer. It's effective when we're faced with a shielded fire, one we can't get to, a fire we can't see from the doorway because it's located either in a remote part of the structure or there's other objects that are hiding it. So what cooling this gas layer does is it slows the transfer of heat to the other combustibles and it reduces the chances that the overhead gases are going to ignite on us. So the way we do that, again, this is part of that indirect attack, right? Sure, but we're with a little bit of a change to it. New research has shown that using directed short bursts or pulses of water using that narrow fog is actually more effective at cooling that gas layer. So if we can find a way to, and there are new nozzles coming out now that are allowing us to do that, but by opening, closing quickly with a couple of quick shots, that's really that's really showing to be a great way of cooling the gas layer. We want to set that nozzle on a narrow fog pattern, direct it upwards towards the gas layer, and quickly and smoothly open and close that nozzle. We're going to vary the length of the pulse depending on the size of the space. So bigger spaces, we can have a little bit longer of a pulse. For smaller spaces, it's going to have to be fairly rapid. We're going to adjust the nozzle pattern based on the fire conditions in the compartment and the configuration and size of that compartment. Be careful of using, and I would say don't use any kind of fog pattern in narrow hallways. We have less room to move, and what you're going to do is end up crashing that thermal line and making conditions quite difficult for you in there. So we want to increase the pulses in large volume compartments or when the upper layer temperatures are really high. So if you're looking at big box stores, areas like that, grocery stores, supermarkets, something, we're going to want to we have a lot more gases to cool. So we're going to increase the duration and the size of that. All right, fire is an upper level of structures. So we're going to talk about a couple of different types of buildings. First one I'll mention is, structures that don't have standpipes, and that's your basic residence and most of the places we go to and most of the structure fires we have. Basically, they don't have standpipes. So the fire attack is going to proceed through the main entrance, and it's going to go up the stairway to the fire location. You're going to check for fire extension below the fire floor first before advancing up the stairs. So you want to make sure, if you're going upstairs, you're going to the third story, check the second story before you go up there. Because the last thing you need is to have a fire that's underneath you burning the structural supports that you're using to stand on. If we have a standpipe system and we have a fire in an upper level of the structure, and this, not a lot of our areas have buildings like this, but it's important to know, and it is a part of firefighting, is to understand this. So the location of the standpipe is now going to determine our method of fire attack. If that standpipe is located in an unprotected location, the attack hose line is connected on the floor below the fire floor and advanced up the nearest stairwell. So we don't take the standpipe on the floor that's on fire unless it's in a protected location like an enclosed stairwell. If it's located in that protective stairwell, we can use the hose line connected from the fire floor. Going upstairs and doing fire attacks in the upper level of structures, this is going to require large numbers of personnel. And the more stories you go up, the more personnel you're going to require. You may need to conduct large-scale evacuations, getting people out, helping them downstairs. You're going to have a lot of tools and equipment you're going to have to carry to upper levels, and you have to maintain that sustained fire attack. You can't quit. That may mean rotating crews out, sending another crew in, following the hose line until they get to that team and relieve them so that now another team can take over. So it should go without saying, but elevators, never used for transporting fire crews to the fire floor, right? We can use elevators in larger structures where, to transport firefighting tools and equipment to a staging area. And normally that staging area is going to be located 2 floors below the fire floor in a high-rise type situation or a apartment building. Attic fires. So attics, these, often attics contain large quantities of wood and possibly other flammable materials within there. Who knows? People can keep anything up in their attics. You've got open air spaces and limited or absent fire stops, possibly no fire stops in the attic. So that fire can go anywhere it wants to up, in the roof area. You've got convection currents and radiant heat that help contribute to the fire growth. In modern construction, we have fresh air that enters the attic space through vents mounted in the soffit. There's many different types of construction and vents, so it's going to vary. But we need to treat attic fires, if we're not seeing it already venting, we need to treat these fires as ventilation limited, meaning when we can expect quite an increase in fire behavior when we open up the building to attack that fire. So when we're performing an attack on an attic fire, we want to look at things like we want to remove the soffits and the vents. Try and use a straight stream nozzle to spray a stream of water all the way along the side of the house and try to cool some of the area there. Following that, we're going to look at ways, is there a way that we can ventilate the attic space? We don't do vertical ventilation. We're not going to be putting people on the roof to do that, but there are other ways of doing it, and perhaps a positive pressure would work in this situation. So understanding flow paths is very important when we're dealing with attic fires, and how to extinguish them. But if we're opening soffits up and finding our own ways in, that's typically, we're going to find it, we're going to be able to extinguish it. Chimney fires. Some of our departments have had quite a number of chimney fires over the last year, and these are a very high occurrence type call. We have a lot of wood stoves and fireplaces throughout our areas. Chimney fires can prevent several challenges. Usually, a chimney fire is going to go from floor to floor. It's going to go straight up, and it can spread that fire from floor to floor through the walls. Older chimneys are going to decay over time, and creosote is really combustible. Creosote is the buildup that's inside the chimney walls, which is why we need to clean our chimneys annually if you use wood burning stoves. When we're responding to a reported chimney fire, we want to look for smoke or flames coming from the top of the chimney. And we also want to look around the chimney and see, is it coming, is there smoke and flame coming from areas that aren't a part of the chimney? Because we need to suspect that that fire has entered into the void spaces or the attic possibly. We want to avoid using water, certainly an excessive amount of water, but we want to avoid using water as much as we can on chimney fires. So with chimney fire suppression, a couple of great techniques. And the one that they talk about in the books often, and that does work very well, is the dry chemical extinguishers. Excellent way to do it. We're not doing water damage. Dry chemical, again, it's going to create less problems. It's going to snuff it out. There's no oxygen in there, and it's going to inhibit that chemical chain reaction. If the fire is not severe, we can use salvage tarps to cover the floor around and nearby contents as well. We're there performing a service. We should not be leaving the place in a worse shape than it was when we came, other than the fact that there was a fire there. But if we can prevent, wrecking, putting dry chem all around, placing these tarps down can definitely go a long way in
Sean, doesn't like chimney fires, they have a different smell to them when they start too, right? Like creosote burning, it's different than like wood burning.
Yeah, by the time we get there, it's often smelling like everything else we smell. But as a homeowner, yeah, you may smell something a little bit different. It's a little more gummy, and it is kind of a resin that's starting to burn. So it may give off a distinctive smell. But a lot of times people are finding it just by hearing the crackling, by seeing the evidence, hearing that and saying what's going on, maybe going out, checking outside and finding out that oh yeah, we got a problem here. I can tell you that I haven't heard of anyone identifying a chimney fire by smell yet. And it's also one that I am duty bound to tell you is not a good way for us to determine if it was a chimney fire or another type of fire, because of course we want to have respiratory protection anytime we come in contact with smoke. So back to the dry extinguisher though, we're looking at discharging the extinguisher from the top of the chimney. So we want to do it from the top down. That gets the dry chemical to go all the way down through the bottom, which is why, again, we place the salvage tarps and things around the base of the wood stove to make sure that, we catch as much of it as we can and just don't make a mess of the residents, right? Now, when it's not in the books, but I'm going to talk to you about anyway, small chimney fires, we can often actually put out with a tray of ice cubes. One of my favorite techniques. We take a tray of ice cubes. Yeah.
If we're supposed to put the chemical down the top of the chimney, how do we do that without going on the roof?
The SOGs allow us to go on the roof for chimney fires. They don't allow us to go on the roof for vertical ventilation.
Oh, cool. Good to know.
So, and going on the roof would be using, working off of a roof ladder while you're up there, not standing directly on the roof, but working off of a roof ladder. All right. So again, my favorite one is the tray of ice cubes. It's, I can't remember where I learned this, but it works really great. And 9 times out of 10, I found very little was needed after using it. And it works, by basically you take a tray of ice cubes, you put it in the firebox, and you close it right down. Now what you have is a time release steam that comes up. Not much time because they're going to melt very rapidly, but it's going to allow for a column of steam to go up that chimney, and that column of steam is going to cool because we know that the steam cools. It's going to displace oxygen so that the fire can't breathe, and it's going to snuff that fire out. If you don't have that, a small cup of water is another way. It's more of a big poof straight up the chimney because it doesn't have that time release that you get with ice cubes. Many departments are also equipped with what's called a chimney snuffer nozzle, and the picture on the right of this slide is a chimney snuffer nozzle. These nozzles are basically comprised of a weighted head with misting ports out the side. They use very little water, and they're also used from the top down. So with the chimney snuffer nozzle, we basically lower the chimney snuffer nozzle down, and we bring it back up. And we're going to repeat that up and down until we're confident that that fire is extinguished and unlikely to flare up again. With chimney fires, we then want to also use a thermal imaging camera, thermal imaging device to check for hot spots behind the walls and in the attic spaces. In some cases, we may need to start removing some drywall or siding. We need to look and check for extension. And something to keep in mind, chimney fires are prone to rekindle and to reignition flare-ups. So we want to be really good with our overhaul. We want to be very confident before we leave that scene that we've done everything we can and that fire is not going to flare back up again. So now below ground structure fires. We'll talk about residential first. In residential basements, I mean, these areas can be used as self-contained living quarters. They may be entertainment rooms, man caves, she sheds. It might be a utility space for storage, heating, ventilation equipment, and air conditioning, water heaters, coal or fuel storage. It could be anything in these basements, right? Some residential basements, they could be garages or storm shelters. They may be totally unfinished. In some cases, they're either totally unfinished, partially finished, or completely finished. In an unfinished basement, the floor joists are exposed very early to the fire, and they're going to fail much quicker when we don't have that layer of drywall protection. Because finished basements are because unfinished basements are generally unoccupied, fire may have the chance to spread in a basement before it's actually found. If we had someone living there, they'd see the flare. Now we've got an unfinished basement, it may have a chance to go for much longer before the residents are even alerted to the fact that something's wrong. In partially or completely finished basements, the ceiling may be composed of metal grid systems to support like drop-in tiles. If you know what I'm talking about, they've got the grid system up there of the metal. That offers very little fire resistance if that's what they're using down there. And it actually could increase the fuel load and the fire behavior down there. So other factors that we need to take into account with basement fires, like anything else, what's the fuel loading? How much do they have down there? What is the age of the building and therefore the age of the joists and the structural supports that we're dealing with? Are there any hidden paths within the walls and the ducts that may be exposed in the basements that could cause fire spread throughout the rest of the residence? And again, the use of lightweight construction materials, they're very susceptible to rapid collapse. We're dealing with materials now that are made with particle board and other things that are very lightweight, good cost effective, very strong under normal conditions, but again, fail very quickly under fire conditions. If a basement's been converted into a living space, that may have created a life safety hazard. So our initial size up of the scene is going to be very important. They may not have the ability to get out. If they made it into a living space, it was consideration given to making sure that the windows and bedrooms and areas like that are able to provide egress and get them out. Floor assemblies in basements can reach a point of collapse even before we arrive on the scene. Right? This is all based on UL underwriters laboratory testing. Sounding the floor and using a thermal imager is not sufficient to determine whether that floor is safe. In some cases, we won't know until we've fallen through it. So you need to be aware. Basement fires, we need to be on high alert with these types of fires. After the fire is extinguished, we want to take a look at those floor joists before we're making the determination of sending more personnel into the building for overhaul operations, right? So when we access a building, we could, for a basement attack, you might be able to make it through an interior wall, an exterior or enclosed stairwell. Basically, once we've made that entry, though, it's going to start to act as a flow path for the smoke. If we could also make it, sometimes it's through a door, just from the upstairs. Well, most times that's what it is. As soon as we do that, we've created a flow path for the smoke, and that is what we call the chimney effect, right? When we start going down, it's like we're going straight through a chimney. And for those of you who've gone through interior live fire, you know what I'm talking about. And yeah, we started doing it a little better now and make it much hotter when you're going down, so that you get the full chimney effect. So attempting to advance an attack hose line may only be available by one avenue. It might be only one choice. There might not be enough windows or other ways for you to get into that area. So you may have to go down through this chimney. And that exposes us to a tremendous hazard. Like I said, another way, maybe an exterior open stairwell might be an option. Window wells, depending on the size of them. We obviously don't want them to be too small if that's what we're going to be using. There might be, and if we're really lucky, there's going to be a grade level or some kind of walk-in door or window that we can use. And just keep in mind, water from an 1.5-inch hose, using a 38 or 45, might not provide enough of the cooling that we're going to need to overcome the gases that are venting up that stairway. If the fire is ventilation limited, any added ventilation, any added airflow in there may result in flashover very quickly, or an increase to that in rapid fire development, and that can be fatal to firefighters on the stairs or in the basement. So we're talking about below grade commercial structure fires. Some commercial structures will have construction very similar to residential structures. Some of them are going to be far more robust though than residential basements. Older may have floor joists that are wood or heavy timber. Modern floor joists may be exposed or unexposed concrete panels or metal C-joists. Could include a number of different subfloors, as you see in the picture here. Mechanical spaces, parking garages. And exposure exposure to fire could weaken these metal floor supports. Heavy objects that are on the floor above can increase the chances of floor collapse. Unprotected steel girders and other supports we talked about in building construction, these can elongate and also increase the chance. So they will elongate at temperatures of around 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit or 538 degrees Celsius, which is quite common in structure fires. So we're going to start seeing that elongation of these steel supports. And when these steel supports elongate, what it ends up happening is pushing out on exterior walls and causing structural collapse. You may or may not have standpipes in stairwells leading to the subfloors, and we need to make sure we're doing a risk-benefit analysis, right? Same ways that we would do in a residential basement fire or other fires, is we'd want to see to make sure that we're not doing undue risk for something that's not savable and that there's no savable life. Something that can really help us out are things like pre-incident surveys and inspections. On larger structures, commercial structures, all of our departments should be doing these types of pre-incident surveys and inspections, pre-incident planning. That's going to help us determine what type of basement ceiling construction we have, determine the amount of fire that it can withstand before it collapses, and helps us also identify if there are standpipes located and what potential ventilation areas we might have within the structure. So a big part of fire control as well is exposure protection, right? We want to protect areas that are unaffected by fire, right? It takes a number of forms, and that depends on the location and type of the resources that we have available. There is what we call interior exposure protection, and interior exposure protection are things like closing doors and other openings between the fire and the unaffected area, right? Proper use of tactical ventilation to ensure that the smoke movement is limited and the fire is confined. And then there's some passive forms of exposure protection for interior operations, which are the fire rated walls and doors that they may have within the structure. For exterior exposure protection, we're typically talking about removing endangered persons or property or items is a big way of protecting the exposures. That's especially useful at fast moving fires, ground cover fires, and flammable liquids that move very quickly as well. This may include things like evacuating people who are in the path of a fire that's coming towards them, possibly relocating things like parked vehicles, railroad cars, depending on where you are, using heavy equipment like forklifts or other heavy equipment to move piled storage items. Moving our own apparatus. Our apparatus can end up being an exposure as well when fast-moving fires end up putting them in danger. The more common method of exposure protection that we're all fairly familiar with is the application of a spray of water or foam, some kind of extinguishing agent between the fire and the exposure. This is the most likely approach, especially if the exposure is an adjacent structure. We can't move out. There's no heavy equipment in the world we're going to get that's going to move that house out of the way. Our only option is to really protect it using water streams or other extinguishing agents. We want to keep that surface of that exposure cool. That'll limit the effect of radiant heat on that exposure. So the radiant heat transfer won't be sufficient, hopefully, to actually ignite the structure beside it or the exposure. A direct application of water is often far more effective than spraying. We used to use what's called water curtains, and the water curtain would actually make a curtain of water in between the two structures. We now know that cooling the exposure itself is actually a better way of exposure protection. Another big part of Kailana, you have your hand raised? All right, I'll move on. Kailana, if you have anything to ask, you can just click your mute button off and ask it. So controlling building utilities is something that we need to consider when we pull up to any structure fire. We'll talk about electricity first. It could be typically it's coming from commercial power company. There are alternative power sources as well, possibly solar panels and other things on roofs. We must disconnect the electricity when there's fire in a structure. With commercial power supply, it's as easy as calling BC Hydro and having them show up to the scene. They're the ones who are actually going to be able to fully disconnect that line. The lines could be above or below ground, but they're going to connect the structure to the main power grid. The primary location for shutting power off is at the meter. The locations of these meters can vary as well. So what we're going to want to do is pull the handle on the side of the meter box down. In residential structures, we also shut off there's another way to shut it off, which is the main circuit breakers. Individual circuit breakers will not shut off the power to the whole house. We need to do the main disconnects to shut off the power there. We shouldn't be shutting off power, however, until it's ordered by the incident commander or your team leader. The electricity may be required, and this is especially true in commercial structures. Not so much in residential structures, but in commercial structures, you may need that electricity to operate elevators, air handling equipment, HVAC units and things like that we may want to use for ventilation. If we shut the power off, the main power switch should be locked out and tagged out. And that's going to depend on your time. May need to remain on power as well to provide some kind of lighting around. There's alternative sources like I talked about, solar panels. They can generate enough power to kill people as well. They'll often include a shut-off switch of their own on an electric meter. If you find a solar panel on a roof, during a fire, you have to avoid it completely. Other ways are wind turbines, not as common. I don't think I've come across anything like that before, but it's out there and it's getting more popular. The power for wind turbines can often be shut off at a meter box or a main power shut off as well. Then there's fuel power generators. We all have seen these. In fact, most of our rigs carry them. And they're usually used to replace a power company's service when we have interrupted service, or to provide us power in remote locations. But in some places, it could be their sole source of power, so shutting that off is important. Gas utilities, a couple of different types. We got natural gas, and natural gas in its purest form is methane. And methane has and natural gas has a flammability range of 5 to 15%. So it's a pretty big flammability range, actually, 10% there. So natural gas is lighter than air. It will rise when released, and it will diffuse in the open and into the atmosphere. It's not toxic, but it is an asphyxiant. So it does displace the oxygen, and you will not be able to breathe. It has no odor, but a smell is always added to it. And natural gas can also be shut off at the meter. It's located outside, as you can see on the picture there. That's the picture in the center is a person shutting off the gas flow there using a gas key. So we want to contact the utility company when gas has been shut off or when any emergency involving natural gas occurs. We're going to want Fortis out there as well. They'll provide a crew with special tools, maps, and of the distribution system, and they're going to have the training and experience they need to make sure that it's off properly, or if it needs to be reconnected, that it's done properly. And it's going to be their job. It's always the utility company's job to turn utilities back on after they've been shut off, and that goes as well for electricity. It's not going to be us who turns it back on. It'll be the electric company. They have the skills needed to do that. So the next we'll talk about is LPG, liquefied petroleum gas, also known as propane. Butane is another form of LPG. So LPG is basically fuel gas is stored in a liquid state and under pressure. That's where the liquid petroleum gas comes in. So again, butane and propane. Propane is the most widely used, so that's what we'd be familiar with. Used primarily as a fuel gas in campers, manufactured homes, some rural homes, and a lot of our areas, use propane for heat. It's used as well as a fuel for motor vehicles. Like natural gas, it has no odor, but they add a smell to it so that we know when there's a leak. Again, non-toxic, but classified as an asphyxiant, will displace oxygen and cause it, and we won't be able to breathe. With propane, a little different than natural gas is that it's 1.5 times as heavy as air, so it's about 50% heavier than air. What that means is it's going to sink to the lowest point possible, and it's going to pool in low areas. We may end up standing in pools of this invisible gas and be unaware of it. And if it mixes with fuel in the right quantities and gets an ignition source, it could be a really bad day for us. It's explosive in concentrations between 1.5 and 10%. So again, it's a fairly large range, almost 10% for that as well. And it's unlike natural gas, it's not typically plumbed in underground through distribution lines. It's often shipped from distribution points to the point of usage, and that's from a truck will come in and fill it up. The supply of LPG, we shut it off by shutting off a valve, and you can see the valve in that picture up at the top as well. A leak of propane is going to produce a visible cloud of vapor, and that visible cloud of vapor will initially go up, but will then hug the ground and start going and pooling in these low-lying areas. The way to deal with that, if it does happen, is using a fog stream of at least 100 gallons per minute. And we use that to dissipate the propane and kind of push it off and move it out of the way and make it kind of mix a little bit more with the atmosphere until it becomes no longer a danger. Yes.
There's also there's still houses out there that are using that home heating oil. It's basically diesel.
Right.
There are still houses in this area that are using the oil furnaces still.
Wow, that would make things really exciting. So, and I mean, using that, I mean, if it's a diesel, it's somewhat less flammable than a gasoline, but still obviously highly combustible, and something that needs to be controlled when we get there as well. And we need to be made aware of that by the building owner. Thanks, Doug. So again, the shutoff valve is located at a point where the supply line from the tank enters into the structure. So there's a couple of shutoffs typically. Now, one that I don't have a picture for here is, but it is a utility that we need to consider as well, is water. water, often we're going to shut it off to prevent further water damage from broken pipes. So, fires are going to cause these pipes to expand, break, crack. And so if that's happening, and we're seeing, we're getting water leakage in the structure, we're going to want to consider shutting the water off. Also, there's sprinkler systems and things like that. So, by shutting the water off, we can make sure that the sprinklers aren't continuing to run there. Shut-off valves for water are located underground with a water meter. The location is typically going to depend on the location of the water distribution lines in the area. Water shut-off keys or pipe wrenches should be used. You turn the water supply, key about 90-degree angle, and that'll shut it off. But we'll get utilities companies out there to deal with that. And again, just like the other utilities, once it's shut off, it's the restoration of that is going to be the responsibility of our water department. Talk a bit about some fire protection systems. So the first one on the left is called an FDC, a fire department connection. So if we are pulling up to a fire and there is an FDC available, one of our first priorities is going to be to hook up to that FDC. This allows the pumper to supplement the water supply and the pressure in the structure's sprinkler or standpipe system. So if the sprinklers are going, they've got a limit, they've got a certain supply of water and a certain amount of water that's available to them to start with. We are now going to jack it up with our apparatus by connecting to an FDC. Control valves. If we shut off a control valve, we can often stop the flow of water from activated sprinkler heads. And these are going to be located in mechanical rooms. So it's only done once the fire is under control and the incident command is given the order that they want this done, right? If we close the firefighter with a portable radio, it has to be the one that does it. So the valve can be reopened if we need it. And there's a couple of different types that I'm not going to bore you with right now. Now, when we look at sprinklers as another fire protection system that some buildings may have, and we in the fire service definitely promote the use of sprinklers. If you ever have an opportunity to see them in action, and see a video of the difference between a sprinklered and unsprinkled unit, sprinklers do a great job. But but they can also do a lot of damage because they continue with the flow of water after their usefulness is no longer. Basically, once the fire is under control in a protected structure, we need to shut those sprinklers off. That may include using things like wooden wedges, and the technique that's being shown in the picture on the right here is a great technique, using two wedges, crossing them over, and it basically pushes the sprinkler head up and stops the flow of water. There are other techniques, and there are than the wedges, and you can use things like sprinkler tongs, and there is a sprinkler stopper as well. So I mentioned master stream devices when we were talking about hose lines and nozzles a little bit, but master stream devices are usually deployed in situations where the fire is beyond the effective control of hand lines, or there might be a need for fire streams in areas that aren't safe for us, that aren't safe for the firefighters. So a couple of the main uses of them are, a direct fire attack right at the burning fuels, indirect fire attack, meaning we're going to be entering and going up into that hot smoke layer, as we talked about, a supplement for hand lines that are already attacking the fire from the exterior, or to help us provide exposure protection and protect the things that aren't on fire. So when we're looking at where we want to place these master stream devices, they need to be properly positioned to apply an effective stream on the fire. If it's necessary to move them, we want to shut them down. We don't want to move a master stream device, by hand, like a portable monitor, like we have on the top left there, unless we've shut it down first. The angle at which the stream enters the structure, again, like I talked about, we want it to enter so the structure at an upward angle, and that's going to cause it to deflect off the ceiling or any other overhead objects, and it'll then cause the stream to break and more rapidly turn to steam, and better for cooling, better for steam generation and extinguishment. So we want to place that device in a location that allows the stream to cover the most surface area of the building possible. So when we're looking at it and using it for exposure protections, we just want to direct the stream at the surface of of any exposure facing that fire, and we can also create that water curtain between the fire and the exposure. to supply master streams, minimum is going to take one 2.5-inch hose line. Some master stream devices are supplied by 2, 3, even up to 3, master stream 2.5-inch lines. So know how yours works. Know how know what kind of water you're going to need for that. But because the operation is going to consume huge amounts of water, and this huge amount of water that we're using is now going to accumulate on the inside of the structure. That's going to add some weight, and that's going to increase the potential for structural collapse with all that extra weight from that water. So when we're staffing master stream devices, often, the deployment of that device is going to take, a couple of firefighters. Some of the smaller portable monitors, like in the top left there, can be deployed with one firefighter. Once in place, they can often be operated by one firefighter. And in the case of the blitz fire on the left there, can sometimes be set and set it and forget it, because it has an automatic shutoff. So if for whatever reason that portable monitor, the blitz fire on the left specifically, was to lift off of the ground, it actually has a control mechanism that stops the flow of water, so it's not going to keep going up and causing damage and something uncontrollable. So if the situation is too dangerous to have firefighters stationed, we can also anchor it securely into position. We can use webbing and some kind of spike in the ground or something. Just tie it to a stationary object that's incredibly heavy, so that it won't fly away.
John, I got a question, or not a question, but a comment. If you could discuss it.
Yep.
It's regarding the you mentioned the blitz fire on the left top. Yep. If you're using it above for like head pressure, if you're heading up a hill or something up to a residence, it's very important to realize how to shut that nozzle down. If it does have a reaction where it lifts off the ground and it automatically shuts down, it could cause a tremendous water hammer back to the engine.
Yes. Yes, it could cause a water hammer back to the engine. I definitely think that the damage that's caused to the fire engine is far less severe than what it could cause to the firefighters were it allowed to continue. But that is a great point. So if you are looking at a situation where you've got a lot, it's got a lot of downward pressure when it shuts off, you want to make sure you've got someone there, manning it and at least able to, alert the driver if something like that were to happen and prevent it from happening in the first place.
Yes, well, I just wanted to mention that make sure that the operator communicates with the engine operator that he will be shutting down the line. It's probably better for the engine operator to reduce the pressure to just stop any kind of water hammer, especially if he's elevated.
Absolutely. Good communication is an important part of our water supply. So making sure, preventing this water hammer, these are expensive apparatus we're talking about here. So the more we can do to prevent that, if the operator can lower the pressure before we shut it down, that's certainly advantageous for us. Thanks, Ron. So another type of master stream, one type of master stream is called an elevated master stream. We don't currently use those types in the CSRD, but someday maybe. They're used to apply water from upper stories of multi-story buildings. They can provide exposure protection to endangered structures, structures that may catch fire, and they can be delivered by a number of different types of aerial apparatus, and some are just elevated master stream devices that allow us to shoot water from on high and aren't aerial ladders. So most of what we talked about right now has been really kind of directed towards Class A, some Class B, but we'll talk a little bit about suppressing Class C type fires. So these are fires that are involving energized electrical equipment. Keyword there, energized, right? Once the equipment's been de-energized, no more electricity going to it, it basically becomes a Class A or B fire, depending on what it was, usually a Class A fire. So it's just a burning solid. And it may end up self-extinguishing once if energy was the fuel that was causing that fire to happen. There are times when just de-energizing it can actually suppress the fire. Class C fires can occur at all different types of location. hydro plants, electric power stations, commercial high voltage stations, telephone relay switch operations, anywhere really they could be, right? When we're dealing with things in, delicate electronic or computer equipment, we need to use a clean extinguishing agent, like something like a Halitron, which is actually a brand name. It's a multi-purpose dry chemical agent, and it's very effective, but it could be chemically reactive with other chemicals. And it requires a lot of cleanup if we deploy a Halitron. It must not include water when we're dealing with Class C fires, and I think that goes without saying. It's an energized electrical device. Water is a very good conductor of electricity. We don't use water on Class C fires. So with transmission lines and equipment, these can be damaged during earthquakes. Things happen and they catch fire. Many of us have gone to these, hydropole fires before, or electric fires before. Once they start, they can end up starting fires in grass or other vegetation close by, exterior structures or vehicles. We need to also be aware of the risk of electrical shock for us. And there's current in the ground. So we need to cordon off the circle with a radius equal to the distance between power poles and around the point where the power line contacts the earth. So basically the span of the power poles, that's how big of an exclusion zone we need to have. If a ground fire starts, we wait for the fire to burn away from the point of contact before we attempt to extinguish it, okay? For maximum safety, only utility personnel should ever cut these kind of electrical power lines, right? We don't do that. So fires in electrical transformers are pretty common. Older transformers may actually cause serious health and environmental hazards because the coolant liquids that they use have PCBs in them, and it's a very toxic chemical. We want to use dry chemical or carbon dioxide extinguishers for fires that are at ground level that we can reach. And just allow pole top fires to burn until utility personnel can shut the power off, and then allows us to extinguish using either water, dry chem, or something like that. When we've got underground transmission lines, these kind of areas, they look small from above surface, but these consist of conduits and vaults that are below grade. They can create explosions when a fuse shorts or short circuits because of accumulated gases that are accumulating underground in the vault there. It can throw utility access covers, so those covers that you see at the top there, they can be thrown quite a distance when that happens. And that can really injure firefighters or the public if there's anyone nearby. So firefighters and the public, we need to stay back at least 300 feet when we're responding to any kind of underground vault fire. And we need to make sure that we don't have our apparatus positioned over top of it. Firefighters should never enter the vault until a qualified electrical person has shut it off. And I would suggest that we just don't do it. We leave it, let them go back to it when the smoke clears out. So now there's commercial high voltage installations. These can house in excess of 600 volts. Usually they're housed in vaults or fire resistive rooms. They'll have high voltage warning signs all over the doors. Again, water doesn't get used because we could damage the electrical equipment that's not involved in the fire, and we conduct electricity, which could end up hurting us. The smoke from the fires contains, very toxic chemicals, and that's from the plastic installation, the plastic installations and the coolants that are used there. Typically with these areas, we're looking at a confined space. So if we don't have confined space training, we're not going in for that. So now we'll talk a little bit about basic electrical hazards. We all know electricity bad, for firefighters. It causes things like cardiac arrest, ventricular fibrillation, respiratory arrest. It causes involuntary muscle contractions, paralysis, damage to joints, burns to eyes, and possibly death. It's factors that that will affect the seriousness of that shock are things like the path it takes through the body. of the electrical current takes through the body, the degree of resistance, and that includes the resistance on our skin. If it's wet, we have very low resistance. If it's dry, it might be a little bit higher. The length of our exposure to the electrical current. What's the available current? What is the amperage flow? And the available voltage, which is the electromotive force. And then what frequency is it? Are we talking about alternating current, or are we talking about a direct current? And that's all going to affect the seriousness, but nothing. But the one thing that's certain, we don't want to be coming in contact with electricity. So when we're dealing with an electrical emergency, we want to establish some kind of exclusionary zone, and that's again equal to the distance between power poles in all directions. So you see here, they did one span between the poles, but then there's basically one span from the poles out from where those wires are down. That's where we want to have that exclusionary zone, right? Be aware that the short circuit may have weakened other wires. Other wires may fall at any time. We want to wear full PPE and only tested and approved tools and equipment with insulated handles. We want to do what we can to guard against shocks, eye injuries, electrical arcs, and we'll wait for the utility company just to cut the power line, right? And those of you who've taken the electrical safety course, we stay at least 10 feet, 3 meters, away from power lines when raising or lowering ladders or aerial devices. We don't go within that 10 feet, right? Don't touch any vehicle or apparatus that's in contact with wires. So we want to use fog patterns, not straight streams. Less chance of conducting electricity with a fog pattern. Be aware that there might be live wires outside your field of view that could be in contact with other things that, and pose a risk. Where wires are down, if you start feeling any tingling sensation, you might want to pay attention to that. You need to back away right away if you start just feeling that, because that may be an indication that the ground and the current is in the ground. Maintain a large safety zone around the downed electrical wires and avoid, to avoid what's called ground gradients, right? Ground gradient is the increasing voltage pulses as you go from the source. The ground gradient, so again, ground gradient is the electrical behavior that produces electrical pulses in the ground, starting at a point where the line contacts the ground. It's invisible, you're not going to see it. Stepping from one ripple to another, so stepping from one part of that ground gradient to another, causes an electrical differential that will result in an electrical shock and physical injury. So if you're inside of that gradient and you feel that tingling in your legs, place your feet close together and hop or shuffle out of the danger zone. You don't want to be taking long strides, because that's where you can actually come in contact with the different gradients. Do not attempt to walk or crawl. Our firefighting boots are designed to meet NFPA, an NFPA standard, which is 1971, which requires that footwear provide a certain level of protection from electrical shock, but it's not going to protect you from everything. So Class D fires, right? Class D fires are combustible metals. Metals present a couple of problems because they burn at extremely high temperatures, and they're really reactive to water. If you direct a hose stream at it, it can result in a real violent decomposition of the water, and subsequently a huge release of the flammable hydrogen gas. Very, very stellar light show if you ever try to put water on combustible metals. Water in this case is only going to be effective for keeping nearby exposures below their ignition temperatures and preventing other exposures from lighting up. So there are some effective Class D extinguishing agents. And when you have a Class D extinguishing agent, you can either manually shovel or scoop it right onto the burning metal, or you may be able to apply it using a Class D extinguisher. Class D fires will emit a very characteristic bright white light, and it only diminishes when the ash layer starts to cover that burning material. Don't assume that the fires are extinguished just because the flames aren't visible. All right, it may be this ash material just covering it up, and it may be a very long time before that area is cool enough that we could call it at safe levels. So suppressing fire in vehicles, right? One of the most common types of fires that we could be called to is vehicle fire. Could happen during collisions or some other kind of malfunction. But again, we need to be wearing our full PPE, SCBA, because we have the same kind of toxic smoke and vapors that we can get at any structure fire. Fuel sources for different kinds of vehicles could come into play as well. It might be a gasoline vehicle, diesel, electrical, hybrid. There are LPG type ones as well, propane. There's also biofuels and hydrogen are some of the ones that you might find nowadays. So we want to, first thing we want to do, we want to make sure the scene is safe. We're going to want to, try to divert traffic where we can. All the emergency scene traffic control training for the area. So that's why it's important that we get that training as well. Determine, are there anybody we need to help with, anybody who needs to be extricated that's inside the vehicle? Is the vehicle on fire, or is it leaking fuel and it's the fuel that's on fire, right? And then we want to kind of determine what the type of fuel is and select the right extinguishing agent. We want to stabilize the vehicle, and this is a step that some people, that some departments sometimes forget. But stabilizing that vehicle means, we want to wheel chalk it so that it's not going to roll away on us while we're doing this. Be aware, situational awareness. Are there any down power lines, any other hazards around us? And often we're going to start off with a bit of a defensive technique until we see how the water application is working on this vehicle fire. So the basic procedure on a vehicle fire attack, which you'll go through when you do your exterior live fire course, and often do some good practice at your own fire halls. We're going to want to position the hose line between the burning vehicle and any exposure, right? We want to attack this vehicle fire from a 45-degree angle. We're going to use, and the way we teach it is we start off with a straight stream cooling from a distance. And as we are able to move up, we're going to increase it into the fog pattern so that we're providing ourselves with protection as we move up, and we're still cooling and creating better steam as we get closer and start to extinguish the fire. As we're moving up to it, something we don't get to do at exterior live fires, we want to make sure that we're extinguishing any ground fire that's around us as well. We don't typically cause ground fire at the exterior live fire course, so we don't have that opportunity. But think about it, we don't want to be walking over something else burning to get to that car, right? So we're going to extinguish then the vehicle, any fire like in the vehicle, under the vehicle, and extinguish any remaining fire that's around it. So we're going to, again, approach at a 45-degree angle to the vehicle side and upwind. Now, the reason we do that is, and you can see on the pictures on the right here, we have bumper struts that are pressurized. Those hydraulic struts have the fluid inside, which allows some hatchbacks to go up and stay up and move smoothly. When those get heated in a fire, they can actually shoot off and end up, they can become very pressurized, end up discharging and becoming little projectiles towards us. Now that entire bumper can be shot out and take out, your kneecaps. And I've seen pictures of those hydraulic struts embedded in people's legs or torsos from being launched across. So this is why it's very important we attack at that 45-degree angle from upwind and uphill when possible. We're gonna, again, we've got some extraordinary hazards that may come in with vehicle fires, right? There are some that have large saddle tanks. So, the big commercial vehicles may have large saddle fuel tanks with a lot of fuel inside of them that we need to be aware of. Pressurized natural gas tanks, alternative fuel tanks. The contents of the car could be anything, right? Same thing that you could find in your own home. The trunk of you could have propane tanks, propane cylinders. Could be any number of toxic or dangerous items inside of a vehicle. They say your radioactive materials and munitions. Hopefully not so much, but anything is possible is just what you got to keep in mind, right? So once we've controlled the fire, we want to conduct a quick overhaul, check for any extension and any hidden fires. So make sure we didn't miss anything, around the area. So now another thing to do once the fire is out, we want to disconnect the battery. All right. Disconnecting the battery just ensures that there's not that spark that could cause another fire or airbag deployments and things like that. And then we want to cool the fuel tanks and any intact or sealed components. Make sure that it cools down. We reduce the heat, reduce that risk of flame up.
Sean, I just wanted to point out, I know I went to an accident scene one time. I was in highway rescue and stuff, and you got to also be cautious of things that might have been thrown from the vehicle during the accident. So hence we went to a scene one time, and the propane tank, a loose propane tank, was launched out of the vehicle and was down from the vehicle. So, you know, that could be a hazard as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, and it is important, you know, in auto accidents, same kind of things can happen. And again, we're talking about the fires here. So it could be if it's a result of a collision, though, it's very important to do an appropriate scene size up. And when we're doing when you do auto extrication, you learn terms about interior, inner circle, outer circle. And that outer circle sometimes isn't even enough to catch everything. So really taking a good look around, items can be launched, and that includes people, can be launched quite large distances from that really rapid deceleration that happens in a crash. So great point in that. All right, so a little bit more about suppressing vehicle fires. If it's an engine or trunk compartment fire, we have to get access to it first to extinguish it. So first, you know, try it before you pry it. We want to make, you know, just check it. So maybe we can get it easy. If we can't, we got to force entry into it. We're going to want to cool those front bumper struts and the rear bumper struts to prevent accidental activation, because we are now going to have to be working, you know, close by those, right in line with that. We aren't at that 45-degree angle once we have to make entry to, you know, an engine or a trunk compartment. So let's cool that down. Once the trunk's open, direct the hose stream into the space until the fire is extinguished. For engine compartment fires, the fire has to be controlled before the hood can be opened. We can direct a hose stream through a grill or an air scoop. We can drive a piercing nozzle. It's an excellent technique for engine compartment fires. Piercing nozzle through the hood, through the fenders, into the wheel well, wherever you have to put it. We may consider doing an opening or making a cut large enough for a hose stream to be introduced in the hood of the vehicle, or using a pry tool of some type to get inside. With passenger compartment fires, we want to use the best, you know, the most appropriate nozzle and pattern for the situation. Usually, you know, again, fog stream is what we're looking at. Better, you know, better conversion to steam, better use of the water supply you're going to have. Not often you're going to have a hydrant to tag into for a vehicle fire call. It's possible, but not always. Yeah. We want to look at, you know, once we've got it controlled enough, we're going to want to look at opening the door. If it's locked, we can always ask the driver for a key, right? If we can't get that, maybe we end up needing to find a different way in. And the other way to get in really is just breaking the window. We're looking at tempered glass here, very easy to do it. And we're going to want to attack that with the fog pattern. Medium fog should sometimes do, wide fog is fine too. If we have an undercarriage fire, so fire underneath, like on the right there, you can see all that fire underneath that poor van sitting there. So if that fire is getting close to a vehicle, we want to use a straight stream to reach under it. If the vehicle is on a hard surface, we want to direct it downwards and allow the water to kind of deflect upwards to the undercarriage. And we want to go around, make sure we open the hood and direct the steam through the engine compartment. So that all that steam that's created underneath the undercarriage is now going to come up through the engine compartment, and it's going to also cool that area as well.
Hey, Sean.
Hey.
One more on the windows there. Just to be aware that I think the new spec for side windows is now that they have to be laminated if they don't have side curtain airbags. And so a lot of new vehicles, you won't be able to bust out the side windows the way they bust now. You won't get through it with a basic smash.
And that's a good point. If you try to break the window and you can't get through, it's likely that it is a laminated glass. And laminated glass, we can't really smash through. It would take too long and far too dangerous. The only way to take a laminated glass is really to cut it out. They have specially designed, windshield cutters for that. Sawzalls work really well as well. But when you start looking at laminated glass on windows, very high hazard comes from the glass dust that's created when you're actually using a saw on these types of windows. Very fine particulate dust that occurs, and we inhale that, and very much like asbestos and things like that, but even like worse, it's basically you're inhaling glass that's now cutting you up from the inside in your lungs, and causes very, very serious problems. So anytime we think about having to cut a laminated glass, you need to be wearing masks. There is no cutting it just standing there without it. You need to have some kind of respiratory protection on to prevent that glass dust from being inhaled. Thanks for that. So now we've got, we get to a part about suppressing vehicle fires in alternative fuel vehicles. The more and more of these alternative fuel vehicles every day, right? We can often identify them with things like the vehicle logos, or they'll have the fuel-specific logos somewhere on them. The fuel ports might look a little different. Even the profiles of some of these vehicles looks different. Sometimes it can be really hard to tell, though. So again, just like every other vehicle fire, we're going to want to park the apparatus away from it, to approach from uphill and upwind, if possible, from a 45-degree angle, full PPE, again, we want to have that backup hose line ready as well. And try to find, see if you've got an extinguishing agent specific to the type of fuel that you're dealing with there. A few different types: natural gas. Natural gas is great, clean burning, high ignition temperature, but you'll find it in things like government vehicles, some taxis, some utility vehicles. The fuel for natural gas vehicles is often located in the trunk area, under the side panels, or in some cases, open beds in pickup trucks. You'll see natural gas will also have, fuel vehicles will have pressure relief devices that will vent, and the fuel shut-off valve may be located in the wheel well. So some of the tactics we want to use for that, if we don't see fire in the natural gas vehicle, use a gas detector to see if we can locate it. Shut off all the valves and eliminate any ignition sources, and stay clear of any vapor. If the fire is visible, just let the fuel burn itself out. Use water or foam to extinguish it if you have to. But really, what's it doing? It's just burning off the gas as it goes and getting rid of our other problem. And we can use a fog stream to disperse those vapors, same as we would with LPG. Liquid natural gas so there's liquefied natural gas as well as natural gas, and liquefied natural gas is often stored in a liquid state by cooling it, and it's a cryogenic. It has to be cooled to negative 162 degrees Celsius, and that's going to be housed in a double-walled vacuum installed container. If there is no fire or leak, you just need to stabilize the vehicle, set the emergency brake, chalk the tires all the time. Chalk the tires. You don't want to be one of those YouTube sensations chasing a burning vehicle down the street. Turn off the ignition, shut off the gas cylinder. So we want to avoid any contact with the liquefied natural gas. Like I said, cryogenic. If it gets on your skin, it will freeze and it will cause serious damage. We want to stay clear of any vapor clouds that happen. There are some dry chemical agents. One is called Purple K. There's some high expansion foams that work really well on LNG fires. But we want to, and the other option is to use sand or dirt to prevent LNG from entering storm drains. So then there's liquefied petroleum gas. Liquefied petroleum gas, again, it's a bit safer than gasoline. Basically the incidents involving LPG vehicles, same thing, 45-degree angle. Use gas detectors to try and find leaks. Just allow the fire to self-extinguish. It's burning off the propane. If we extinguish the propane, you've still got a propane leak, and that propane is now going to pool around your feet and cause another hazard you need to take care of. So if it's the propane that's burning, let it burn off. Use foam or water when it's necessary to extinguish it. Just keep other things cool, and by directing a fire stream at the top of the gas tank. And same thing, stay clear of any vapor clouds. So now electric vehicles. More and more we're finding these electric vehicles coming out. So with them, I mean, you might show up, the engine's running, you won't hear any noise. That can be very dangerous for us if it gets put into gear, and again, something we need to be aware of. If we don't see any fire at one of these calls, we want to still secure the vehicle by chalking tires, turning off the ignition, remove the key. If we see smoke, we need to be in full PPE and SCBA. Do not go close to it. Establish a scene security and protect any exposures around it, and avoid contact with the fluids, right? So it's just not something we're going to get too close to. The burning battery is very toxic. The batteries in the electric vehicle is its only source of power. A lot of different designs and locations, you know, trying to figure it out can be very difficult. Do not ever look to cut orange wires. The orange cables are high voltage cables. Never cut those. Blue and yellow color coded cables can also present electrocution hazards, so be aware of those as well. Full PPE. So with hybrids, you're dealing with a vehicle that combines both the battery electrical systems with a gasoline, a diesel, a biodiesel, or something else. Basically, you shut off power with ignition or a power switch and remove the ignition key from any hybrid vehicle as well. Water is the recommended extinguishing agent, although sometimes there'll be other specific ones that are recommended depending on the manufacturer. And same with electric vehicles and hybrid vehicles, we never cut the orange wire. Orange, blue, yellow color-coded electrical cables, none of them, all right? Other types of fuels may be things like ethanol or methanol. These are often gasoline blends. Basically, if there's a fuel leak suspected, we want to use caution and use PPE and SCBA. When the vehicle's on fire, we want to have a control zone, and we can only use an alcohol-resistant Class B foam to extinguish these types of fires in ethanol and methanol fueled vehicles. Another type you might hear about sometimes is biodiesel. It's a blend of liquids made from natural plants and diesel. It's slightly lighter than water and has a flash point of about 130 degrees Celsius or 266 Fahrenheit. It's used in any vehicle that's designed for diesel fuel can use biodiesel. And it doesn't require a logo. So it might have biodiesel, you don't know. If the vehicle's on fire, use a dry chemical extinguisher, a water fog spray, or foam to extinguish. And the last one I'll talk about is hydrogen vehicles. Hydrogen is colorless, odorless, non-toxic, energy efficient. It has self-ignition temperatures of 287 degrees Celsius or 550 Fahrenheit. And the flammability range, though, of hydrogen is between 4 and 75%. So it has a huge flammability range. The flame is visible invisible. Sorry, if it's daytime, we would need a thermal imaging camera to even see the flame. And often these vehicles are going to be marked with a manufacturer's logo. So if we come up to it and it has a leak, shut off the ignition, isolate the fuel from any ignition sources, chalk the wheels. Do not extinguish the fire on a hydrogen vehicle. Just protect the exposures and allow that fuel to burn off. And you see that as a common theme for some of these alternative fuel vehicles. The thing with vehicle fires is, if we didn't show up, it's going to burn itself out. Let's sometimes just do that and let it do its job. And oftentimes, we're actually going to find that's the safest tactic.
Hey, Sean.
Yep.
Just as an introduction to all this for the alternate fuels and all that, you guys sent out email a while ago with courses through the NFPA that were online, free courses to do. And they are actually rather informative, just to give you the basic knowledge a little bit further into that, as well as the energy storage and the photovoltaic systems as well. Perfect. So something to keep in mind for everybody out there.
Thanks, Darcy. So yeah, and for those of you who would like to take that online course, it is a free course. Talk to your chief or training officer. If they've lost the link, I should be able to get it for them. All right. So fires and other types of Class A material. We talked a lot about structure fires. There's other Class A materials, styled, stacked or piled materials, raw materials found in sawmills, lumber yards. Basically the value of the material that we're dealing with here varies widely. The greatest danger we have with these types of material is typically exposures. Our goal in stacked or piled materials is to confine the fire to the pile or the building of origin. The fire streams, when you're dealing with a piled or stacked items, it should be directed at the extreme edge of the fire to control fire spread. Again, it's the exposures we're concerned about here, not so much the material. We will get to the material, but we need to make sure that that fire doesn't spread beyond it. So we're directing our fire streams at the extreme edge of the fire. So we'll use a straight stream from a distance. We can always shift to a fog pattern as, and transition more as we get closer. Class A foam can be very effective on this type of fire. Small unattached structures, different shapes and sizes. These have no classification by NFPA. Again, unless there's some real reason we need to put it out there, our biggest concern is fire spread. We want to prevent fire spread. Class A foam, fog systems, very effective. These could also be used, and we need to be aware, it could be used to store anything, and that can include flammable, combustible liquids, explosives, other illegal materials. If there's a question of the hazard, apply water from a straight stream, protect exposures, and just allow the fire to go out on its own. And then there's the wonderful trash container fire. And the trash container fire is one of the rotations you'll do in exterior live fire. They're going to vary in size, different kind of products. They can have anything in there. Aerosol cans, batteries, propane tanks, other hazardous materials, plastics, biological waste, could be anything. Once that fire is controlled, and we do it very similar to a structure fire attack. We cool from a distance. As we get closer, we're going to use our fog pattern to act more as a shield for us. And then that fog pattern, you see a beautiful little loop there where we're getting it up and inside of the trash container to put the rest of the fire out there. And again, that fog will then convert to steam rather quickly and have a better cooling effect. Some departments even use master streams on trash container fires. And this is certainly one of the ones that you will do in a rotation in exterior live fire. So combating ground cover fires, different types of ground cover fires, and they're going to vary in sizes, right? And a lot of different causes, lightning, auto ignition is one of them, even sparks from rock slides or, some discarded smoking materials, camping, could be anything. Characteristics of ground cover fires are very different from those from fires in burning buildings. Very, very different. Influences of the fire behavior in ground cover fires are things like the fuel type, what is burning, the weather conditions, and the topography of the area, how hilly or rocky it is. These can burn very rapidly and continuously and grow in size very quickly. So a ground fire, we're looking at something that burns in the layer of the dead organic matter that generally covers soil in a forested area. They're very slow moving, a ground fire, smoldering basically. They can go undetected for months before they actually enter the flaming stage. And they're generally limited to forested areas. Very difficult to extinguish. It requires us to dig deep down and actually get at the fire that's in the ground. A surface fire is different than a ground fire. It's the most common type. It burns on the soil's surface, right? So you're consuming low-lying grass, shrubs, other vegetation. This can occur anywhere as well. It can be natural or human caused. And then there's the crown fire. These are the wind-driven, high-intensity fires that move through treetops in heavily forested areas. Typically, they're caused by things like lightning strike or extensions from ground or other surface fires that end up creating larger wildfires and spreading to the treetops. These are also called ladder fires because the fire spreads upward through small trees, fallen timbers, and other what we call ladder fuels until they get into the crown area. So with a ground cover fire, there's always two elements of the fire triangle always present in the natural environment, and that's oxygen and fuel. So we're just missing one element here, which is the ignition source, and now we've got a ground cover fire. So the fuel could be, subsurface, it's going to be categorized based on the location. Subsurface fuels, that's things like roots, peat, other things like that. And then there's surface fuels like needles, duff, twigs, grass, and downed dead limbs. There's also aerial fuels. These are suspended and upright fuels, usually away from the ground surface, where the air can circulate freely around it. Factors that are going to affect the burning characteristics of the fuel is going to be the fuel size. Is it big, small, lighter, heavier? Also the compactness. Tightly compacted fuels are going to burn slower than those that are loosely piled. The continuity, because the fire will spread faster when the fuels are close together. If they're separated, that's why we make fire breaks. We try to interrupt that fuel supply. And then the volume, the amount of fuel present, just sheer quantity of it in an area is going to kind of have a big role to play in the intensity of that fire and the amount of water that we need to extinguish it. And then there's the fuel moisture content. Fuels that contain less moisture ignite more easily and burn with greater intensity. All right, another factor is the weather. So when we're talking about weather, we're talking about wind, which is going to fan the flames, the temperature, which has an effect on the wind and is close and has an effect on the relative humidity, and the relative humidity has an effect on which has an effect on the dead fuels. They only gain moisture from surrounding air rather than their root system. And then the other thing with weather is the precipitation. How much has it rained? That's largely going to determine the moisture content. So and then we talked about the topography, so the Earth's surface. What are the features that we're dealing with? The steepness of our slopes will impact the fire spread. Fires spread faster uphill than they will downhill. The steeper the slopes, the faster the fire will spread. Other factors are things like the aspect, and that's the compass direction that the slope faces. This will determine the effects of solar heating. So if it's if we've got the sun blaring down on a certain side for a while, it's going to have a lot more heat. So that aspect will certainly, have increased intensity of fire behavior. Other things like local terrain features and drainages, also, drainages can create updrafts as well, causing chimney effects from the fire. Fires can spread extremely fast with that. So we'll go through a few of the parts of a ground fire. So you see on this picture here, we've got a bunch of those different things highlighted. So we'll start with the little red dot over near the left over here. It's called the origin. Origin is the point where the fire started. So in this diagram here, fire started here, and that's the point from which the fire is going to spread. The head is the part of the ground fire that spreads the most rapidly. It's usually found on the opposite side of the fire from where the origin is, and its direction is toward wherever is the same direction that the wind is blowing, basically. It's going to burn fairly intensely at the head and usually does the most damage. A finger is basically just a long, narrow strip of the fire, which is extending from the main fire. So it can also form new heads if the finger gets large enough. The perimeter is the outer boundary or the distance around the outside of the edge, and you see the perimeter here they've got outlined as this orange boundary here. The heel is the opposite. It is basically the side exactly opposite to the head. Usually burns downhill or against the wind, and it burns fairly slowly. Much easier to control the heel of the fire than the head of the fire. Flanks are the sides, basically fairly parallel to the main direction that the fire is spreading. The flanks can end up forming fingers as well, and they'll change based on wind direction. Spot fires, these are caused by flying sparks or embers lying outside of the main fire. These can present a real hazard to us when we're operating there, and they need to be extinguished fairly quickly, or else they could start a whole nother fire. Islands or patches of unburned fuel inside of the fire perimeter. So you see here, there's a couple of islands. The fire burned around it, and there's still some fuel laying in there that wasn't burned. The green is an area of unburned fuels next to the involved area. So the green basically is the area that hasn't yet been impacted by the fire. The opposite of that is the black, which is the opposite of green, right? So it's the area of which the fire is already consumed or blackened. Sometimes we can look at the black as being a fairly safe place during a fire because it's already burned. The fuels are gone. Less chance of that fire coming back on us. Whereas the green, that fuel is still there and can still ignite. Ground fire PPE, a little bit different than structural PPE because turnout gear is not appropriate for battling ground fires. It has its own requirements, NFPA 1977. So we're looking at things like a helmet with eye protection and neck shroud, flame retardant shirt and pants, protective footwear, gloves. That's all helpful. I mean, we don't want to be overheating in our turnout gear. It's just not the right stuff. If we're going to be doing this, at least wear your coveralls when you're going out to these things. But certainly you still need your helmet and eye protection and good protective footwear and gloves. Other items that might be useful, things like a canteen or water bottle. It gets really hot, need to rehydrate. and a backpack or some kind of web belt for carrying extra gear. So with the ground fire attack, basically there's a direct attack. It's action taken directly against the flames at the edge or closely parallel to it. And then there's the indirect attack used, and an indirect attack for a ground fire, we can use that at varying distances from the advancing fire. Basically, let's start from an anchor point. A line might be constructed some distance from the fire's edge. An unburned intervening fuel is allowed to self-extinguish. So we might do a back burn, right? And that's kind of basically an indirect fire attack. Generally used against fires that are too hot, too fast, or too big for a direct attack. So maybe a fire break or doing a back burn. We may begin with one attack method and then switch to another as conditions change, very similar to with structure fires. And some safety principles to keep in mind. We use the acronym LACES. Some, don't have the A part of it, but I like having the A part in there. So when we're looking at LACES, we're looking at lookout, awareness, communications, escape routes, and safety zones. So lookouts are people that are there to monitor fire development and spread. They help watch for rekindles and what's going on with the fire and make sure that, they notify the team of what's going on. With awareness, that just means we need to look for changes in the fire's location, direction, and we need to know what the plan is. What's the plan for the day, which is when we do briefings for wildfire calls. It's usually large briefings, and we're all going to be told, here's what our goals are for the day, here's what we expect the fire to do, and here's the plan for the day. So know the plan, very important. Track the weather, be aware of any changes that are happening out there, and understand what lookouts are trying to tell us. Communications are an essential part of any ground cover operation, of any fire call. Incident command needs to be kept informed and must be in communication with every unit or not necessarily every person, but certainly every unit that's operating and through the incident command system. So we need to have span of control, unity of command, and those communications need to be in place. Escape route, having a path that leads to a safety zone and is short enough to allow personnel to safely get to it is incredibly important. So where are we going to go if things go sideways? What's the safe place to be? And that's the route to get there. And then there's the safety zone. And that safety zone should be available in a burned out area, so in the black somewhere, that's sufficiently cool and accessible. So again, with the ground fire, our safety principles, our size up information is going to include things like where's the location of the fire, the type, the incident, like how do we access it, what are the exposures, what are we concerned about, critical infrastructure around here, weather conditions, wind direction, wind velocity, topography, visibility. So there's some real highly trained specialists around that deal with this and are very good at it. But your size up is going to be no less important. Understanding some of these concepts, it can be the key to success or failure at an early stage in a ground fire. So understanding as well your resources. What kind of water supply do I have? What personnel do I have available? What kind of apparatus or equipment do I have? And then what am I going to need in the future to deal with this situation? So there's other non-fire hazards to be aware of. Unstable hazard trees, animals, insects, electrified fences can be a real hazard. They're usually low voltage, just be careful if you need a bathroom break. Power grid lines, there might be, electrical power grid lines in the area. Hazardous materials could be anywhere, depending on what kind of industry you have out there. Rolling and falling debris, pits and shafts, animal traps. We've got hunters out there and trappers. And then, lightning. And a big one for us as well that we need to be aware of is heart failure. Cardiac arrest is certainly a big killer of first responders. You're going to work hard at a ground cover fire. You work hard, it's hot, you're going to be sweating. Take regular breaks, drink water, and keep yourself safe, and let incident command know if you need a break. Well, that takes us to the end of fire control and suppression. So again, I appreciate your time today. But remember, attacking fires in the early development is an important aspect of a successful firefighting operation. In addition to selecting and applying the most effective strategy, and the tactics we decide to use, that's incredibly important. Failing to do any of these kind of things can result in the fire growing out of control, which increases the size of the fire, the damage, and the loss that happens, and it could possibly injure us as firefighters. We need to know how to safely and effectively attack and extinguish fires involving structures, vehicles, stacked or piled materials, and ground cover fires, because that's why we're here and that's the job we want to do. We need to do it safely. Thank you very much. I'll stick around and do some questions. I'm just going to stop the recording.